10. Recapitulation. Thus, in 17 days, the two armies of Prince Charles had been defeated. The enemy repulsed beyond the Brenner, had evacuated the Tyrol after having suffered very considerable losses. Austria had lost Palmanova, a very strong fortress, as well as Trieste and Fiume, the only ports of the Austrian monarchy. The province of Goris, Istria, Carniola, and Carinthia were conquered. The Save, the Drave, and the Noric Alps had been passed. The army was now only 60 leagues from Vienna. It entertained well-founded hopes of arriving there before the end of May. The Austrian army, disheartened and ruined, could no longer contend with the French army, which had not suffered any material loss and whose resolution and consciousness of superiority were inexpressibly great. Affairs of Venice. 1. Description of Venice. The Republic of Venice at the period of the French Revolution was the most considerable of the Italian states. In population, it was inferior to the Kingdom of Naples, but Venice had greatly the superiority in the strength of its government and the advantages of its position. The seat of government was a fortified city, unassailable by land or sea. Independently of its land forces, it had a squadron which ruled the Adriatic and caused it to be respected by the whole of the Levant. This city was founded in the 5th century by inhabitants of Friuli and the Paduan district who fled to the lagoons to seek shelter from the oppression of the barbarians. Their descendants constantly maintained themselves independent of the rulers of Italy. That fine peninsula, the prey of revolutions, frequently changed masters. Venice alone, always free and independent, has never acknowledged foreign authority. Venice is the best situated city and port for commerce of all Italy. All the merchandise of Constantinople and the Levant come there directly by the shortest road, the Adriatic. Thence it spreads as far as Turin by means of the Po, and throughout Germany by ascending the Adige to the neighborhood of Botzen, where it finds roads to Augsburg and Nuremberg. Venice is situated near the mouth of the Po and that of the Adige. It is the port of both these rivers. In another direction, it communicates by canals with Bologna, so that all the productions of the great plain of Italy flow through Venice. This city is the nearest seaport to Augsburg and Munich. Nature has made Venice the mart of exchange for the Levant, Italy, and southern Germany. Before the discovery of the Cape of Good Hope, this city had the trade of the Indies by Alexandria and the Red Sea. For this reason, she made a strong opposition to the operations of the Portuguese. She equipped a considerable fleet in the Red Sea. She established an arsenal, places for taking in water, and magazines near Suez. The remains of them are still to be seen at the Fountains of Moses. The Portuguese conquered these fleets, formed at a great expense, and the Venetians, overcome, were compelled to abandon all attempts to stop their success in discovery and in commerce. The lagoons, which are formed by the waters of the Piave and the Brenta, communicate with the sea by 3 passages. The sovereignty of Venice was vested in the aristocracy of some hundreds of families inscribed in the Golden Book. Their subjects comprehended a population of from 3 to 4 millions, extending round Venice in the richest and most fertile regions in the world. Those of Bergamo, Brescia, Vicenza, Verona, Padua, Polissino, Treviso, Bassano, Cadore, Belluno, and Friuli on the mainland of Italy, Istria and Dalmatia on the shores of the Adriatic, and on the Ionian Islands scattered at its mouth. These mainland provinces are bound on the north by the upper ridge of the Julian and Tyrolese Alps, from the source of the Adda to that of the Isonzo. This chain of mountains, almost everywhere impassable, separates them from Germany, with which they have no communication but by the 3 roads which skirt the Adige, the Tagliamento, and the Isonzo. The valleys of the Adige, the Brenta, and the Piave, the Tagliamento, and the Isonzo belonged in their whole extent to this republic. Its navy consisted of a dozen large ships, as many frigates and small vessels which were sufficient to command the respect of the Barbary states, to rule the Adriatic and defend its lagoons. Venice could set on foot 50,000 men composed of Italian regiments recruited in the mainland, or of Sclavonians, a brave race, and in all ages devoted to the Republic, of These she could raise from 10 to 15,000 foot and 4 or 5,000 horse. Their horses are small but useful. These Sclavonians were the troops in whom the Senate placed confidence. They had the very great advantage of being strangers to the language and the manners of the mainland. The city of Venice was very rich, and although its commerce was diminished, it was not destroyed. The families in the Golden Book alone had any share in the government. They filled the Senate, the councils, the assemblies of 40, and other magistracies, which excluded the nobility of the terra firma. Among the latter were a great number of wealthy, illustrious, and powerful families, which, being subjected and deprived of all power, existed without credit or influence, and greatly envied the sovereign nobility of Venice. These nobles of the terra firma were partly descended from the ancient condottieri, the podestas of old, or other persons who had formerly acted a distinguished part in the republics of their cities, and whose ancestors, after having long opposed the enterprises of the Venetians, had fallen victims to the policy of their republic. This traditional enmity, studiously cherished, was added to the hatred created by the nature of the government. The greater part of the people made common cause with the nobility of the terra firma. There was, however, a portion of them attached to the noble Venetians, who had estates and establishments in almost all the provinces. The priests were destitute of credit or consideration in the Republic, which had, at an early period, freed itself from all papal influence. The interest of the head of the House of Austria, who possessed Milan and Mantua in Italy, and a portion of Istria on the Adriatic, was in many respects connected with Venice, which had constant reason to be apprehensive of that monarch, and had always maintained itself against him by the balance of power in Europe, and especially by the protection of France. To pass from the Tyrol to Mantua through Lombardy, it is necessary to cross the Venetian territory from Rivoli to Mantua, being nearly 2 days' march. A military road was secured to Austria by treaties, but the troops were obliged to pass it disarmed and in small detachments. No other military road was allowed across the country from the Adige to the Isonzo in the preceding wars in Italy. Austria was obliged to effect the communications of its army by sea, by Trieste and the Po, as envoys could only pass freely, and the states of the terra firma between Rivoli and Mantua. This gave rise to the cruise of the Chevalier de Forbin under Louis XIV, who intercepted the communications by sea from Trieste to the Po. When the first coalition against France was formed, the Allied powers invited this republic to engage in it. It does not appear that any serious discussions arose in the council on this occasion. The members were unanimous. They were so far from the scene of action that they looked upon themselves as unconcerned in these affairs and wished to remain neutral. When the Count de Lille chose Verona for his abode, Venice did not allow him to reside there until they obtained the consent of the Committee of Public Safety, which was better satisfied that the pretender should be at Verona than at any other place. When the French troops in 1794 marched towards Oneglia and fixed their camp at Savona, Italy was considered to be threatened with invasion, and several powers assembled in Congress at Milan. Venice refused to appear there, not because she disapproved of French principles, but because she was fearful of yielding herself up to the mercy of Austria. Besides, the danger appeared to her very remote. 2 opinions in the Senate. The first is that of the Friends of Austria, the second of the old senators, the third of the Friends of France. But when Napoleon arrived at Milan and Beaulieu, flying in consternation behind the Mincio, entered Peschiera and there stationed at his right in hopes of defending the Mincio, great perplexity and alarm prevailed in the Republic. The immense space which had previously separated Venice from the struggle between democracy and aristocracy had been overrun. The war of principles, as well as that of artillery, raged in the bosom of the state. Animated and violent discussions took place in the Senate, in which opinions were divided between 3 parties. Pizarro and the younger senators, partisans of Austria, wished the Senate to declare against France. They desired neutrality, but an armed neutrality, wishing strong garrisons to be placed in Peschiera, Brescia, Bergamo, Porto Legnago, and Verona, and that those places should be declared fortresses. They recommended that 50,000 men should be raised, that the canal should be expeditiously put in a state of defense, that gunboats should be fitted out upon them, that a squadron should be prepared to guard the Adriatic, and that, in this formidable attitude, war should be declared against the first who should thereafter violate the Venetian territory. Those who held this opinion maintained that if the last hour was come, it was better to die sword in hand than shamefully, that by defending the territory, French ideas would be prevented from infecting the principal cities, that the more formidable the attitude assumed by the state, the greater the respect it would obtain from both the hostile parties, that if, on the contrary, the gates should be peaceably open, and the French suffered to enter the great cities of the terra firma, then the war between the two great powers would be established in the territory of the Republic, and from that moment its sovereignty would be lost. That the first duty of the prince is to protect his subjects, but how could they be protected if the theater of war was suffered to be established in their dominions? The fields would be ravaged and the towns burnt by both parties successively. The unfortunate people would then lose all esteem and respect for the authority which abandoned them. The germs of discontent and jealousy, which already existed, would ferment with violence. The Republic would expire without even deserving the regret of history. The advice to which all the old senators adhered was to take no decisive part. They confessed that all the dangers were real, that the ambition of Austria and the principles of France were both equally to be dreaded, but that fortunately these evils were transitory, that all the calamities that were apprehended might be avoided by discretion, caution, and patience, that the French were of a conciliating disposition, easily won by caresses, that with friendly treatment and able governors keeping great household establishments and having funds at their disposal for secret expenses, the minds of their leaders might be influenced and their goodwill secured, that to declare in our neutrality for the future was to declare war against France, that the gates which had been opened to their enemies could not be closed against them without furnishing them with just grounds of war. Could anyone then seriously think of resisting them with a few thousand Sclavonians? The Republic could not rely on the Brescian or Bergamasque countries, which would rebel at the very first outset, and that if it came to fighting the French, they would immediately find in their partisans of the terra firma a counterpoise to the levies which the Republic might bring against them from Dalmatia. That the existing evils were undoubtedly great, the crisis dangerous, but the danger by no means so imminent as represented by enthusiastic imaginations. The Republic had rode out much more terrible storms. The great object was to gain time. On that wise principle, the ancestors had preserved the state. Happily, Providence had established their capital in an impregnable city. That all the efforts of the Republic ought to be exclusively directed to the strengthening of that city, and that patience, moderation, and time must be relied on in all other respects. A third opinion, which was ascribed to the Proveditore Battaglia, found support in the assembly. The existence of the Republic said he is actually in danger. On one side, it is attacked by the French principles, subversive of our constitution. On the other, by Austria, hostile to our independence. Of these two inevitable evils, let us choose the last. The worst, in my opinion, is slavery to Austria. Let us increase the Golden Book and inscribe in it such of the nobility of the terra firma as deserve it. From that moment, there will be no more divisions, no more opposition amongst us. Let us garrison our fortresses, fit out our fleets, and raise 50,000 men. Then meet the French general and offer him an offensive and defensive alliance that will perhaps lead to some alterations in our constitution, but we shall preserve our independence and our liberty. Is it the first time that the Golden Book has been augmented? In armed neutrality against both parties has been talked of 2 years ago when the storm began. This would have been the most eligible course. It was just because it was equal towards both the belligerent parties. It would have been practicable because there would have been time to prepare for it. If you were now to proclaim it, you would be declaring war against France. You cannot deny the French what you have permitted or tolerated in the Austrians. Can it be proposed to you to go to war with the French army, which is victorious and may be at your gates in a week, while you have not even any treaty existing with Austria, and even if there were one, that power could not render you any assistance for 2 months? What would become of the Republic in 2 months with an enemy so enterprising and active? The second which is proposed, that of patience and time, is as bad as the first. Political circumstances are not now the same. Times are greatly altered. The present crisis does not resemble any of those over which the old republic has formerly triumphed. We cannot learn from the example of our ancestors. The French principles are in all men's heads. They spread in all directions. They are an inundating torrent, which it would be in vain to hope to stop by the dikes of patience, moderation, and fawning. The French partly exists in all the provinces. The measure I propose to you is the only one which can save you. It is plain, noble, and generous. I repeat it. Let us meet the French general and conclude an offensive and defensive alliance with him. Austria will then be too weak to cause us any apprehensions of becoming her prey. We may contribute effectually to the success of the French. We may reinforce them with 25,000 men, keeping at the same time as many as we need for Venice, and assisting them besides with our influence over public opinion and with our local advantages. That will all be very easy because all the parties which now divide the state will be united in their progress and their objects. Our independence will be secured. We shall save the great foundations of our Constitution. The French, reinforced by us, will immediately take possession of Mantua and thus carry the war beyond our boundaries. If, notwithstanding our assistance, the French should be defeated and obliged to repass the Adda, we could defend ourselves against Austria. Austria has no party in our territories. At Brescia and Bergamo, there is no man who would not willingly take up arms to avoid being an Austrian subject. The weight of France and the interest of England and Switzerland would save us. This advice inflamed the passions of all parties. It made an impression on all men of understanding, but succeeded with very few of the senators. How could they think of diminishing their privileges? Family and personal interest prevailed over the good of the nation. This resolution was too great for a degenerate race incapable of any grand ideas. Accordingly, it was neither Napoleon's invasion of Italy nor the French principles which ruined Venice, but the conduct of its government and the stupefaction of those who composed it. As it often happens on great occasions, they adopted the worst measure possible, relying chiefly on chance and providence. 3. Conduct of the proveditores, Mocenigo, Forcarelli, and Battaglia. The Proveditore Mocenigo, according to his instructions, received the general-in-chief at Brescia in a magnificent manner. There was nothing but sumptuous carriages, grand entertainments, and splendid banquets. Never had France possessed better friends than the Venetians. Every noble wished to become the particular friend of the French general. On the other hand, those entertainments to which all the nobility of the country was invited promoted the connections of the French officers with the principal families. None of them could hesitate to invite to their house the generals and officers with whom they had become acquainted at the Proveditores. The Proveditore Foscarelli acted in the same manner. At Verona, he gave entertainments to, but being of an unbending character, he could not dissemble his real sentiments. He was one of the most hostile to France amongst the senators. He could not complain of the entrance of the French into Peschiera because Milieu had gone before them. But when he was asked for the keys of the arsenal to line the ramparts, and when preparations were made for arming the galleys, Foscarelli complained that the French general was violating the neutrality of the Republic. Milieu had, it was allowed, entered the fortifications of Peschiera. He had even fired cannon on the French from its ramparts. But then it was with his own guns. When the French general arrived at Peschiera, Foscarelli waiting on him to endeavor to dissuade him from coming to Verona, as he had announced his intention of doing, threatening to shut the gates and defend them with his cannon. It is too late, said the French general, taking out his watch. My troops have entered. By this time, I am obliged to establish a defense on the Digue during the siege of Atua. It is now with 1,500 Sclavonians that you can secure me and oppose a passage of the Austrian army. If you could, why have you not done it? Neutrality consists in having the same weight and measure for everyone. If you are friends to the French, you cannot possibly refuse them what you have allowed, or at least tolerated, in their enemies. When the keys to the armories and powder magazines were demanded for the purpose of arming Verona, and when it became necessary to demolish a few toll houses for the purpose of forming a demi-lune before Verona on the Vicenza road. Foscarelli, in the utmost agitation, demanded an audience of the French general and talked to him a long time about the violation of the sovereignty of the Republic. These various discussions reported to the Senate convinced it that Foscarelli did not possess the precise qualities adapted to the circumstances. Conceiving that Battaglia would be more agreeable to Napoleon, they sent him as Proveditore General of all the provinces beyond the Adige. He was a complacent, well-informed man of conciliating manners, sincerely attached to the Republic of Venice, enthusiastic towards France, as it was in former times, and preferring even Republican France to Austria. By degrees, the theater of war extended itself over the whole of the Venetian possessions, but it was always the Austrians who first entered new territories. Boglio first occupied Peschiera and Verona. Wurmser first threw himself into Bassano and first crossed Vicenza at Padua. Vinci and the Archduke Charles were, at a subsequent period, the first to occupy Friuli, Palmanova, and as far as the most easterly limits of the Republic. 4 factions at Brescia, Bergamo, and Verona. In the meantime, great agitation prevailed throughout the terra firma, and discontent gained ground rapidly due to the natural causes of disaffection inherent in the Constitution of Venice. Were now added others, arising from the intercourse of the people with the French, the attractiveness of their new opinions, and the admiration excited by their victories over Wurmser and their successes obtained against Helvetii. Italy was generally regarded as lost to Austria, and it was thought that the expulsion of the Austrians must be followed by the fall of the aristocracy. The French general constantly endeavored to moderate these sentiments. When he returned from Tolentino, solely engaged in his scheme of marching on Vienna, he applied his whole attention to the prevention of the troubles which might take place during his absence from Italy. The Venetian states caused him much uneasiness. Irritation had constantly kept increasing in that quarter. Brescia and Bergamo had nearly effected a revolution. The Ferrarioli, the Martenga, the Lecce, the Alessandri were at the head of these commotions and constituted the first and richest families. These two cities exercised a sort of independent government under the name of municipality. They received and disposed of public money and appointed to offices. If the Lion of St. Mark was still seen there, it was rather out of deference to the will of the French general than an act of submission to the sovereignty of Venice. Nothing was heard but severe and violent declamations against the Venetian nobility, both in conversation and through the medium of the press. The injustice of their sovereignty was warmly protested against on all sides. What right has Venice, said the people, to govern our cities? Are we less brave, enlightened, or wealthy than the Venetians? When several provinces acknowledge a monarch who resides in the capital, it is easily accounted for, because the provinces in the capital are equal in his eyes. All are subject to the same laws and entitled to the same privileges. But for the Venetian nobility to arrogate to themselves exclusive sovereignty over us, who are in every respect their equals, is a monstrous, insupportable, and revolting absurdity. On the other hand, the pride of the senators was highly offended at seeing subjects who had for centuries submitted to the sway of their ancestors forget the immense distance by which they were separated. They omitted no exertion to oblige them to return to their duty. They increased their Sclavonian levies, threatened the insurgents with the successes of the Austrians, called them Jacobins, and spread the most alarming reports respecting the French. Everything proclaimed the approach of a violent shock. Battaglia, in his dispatches to the Senate, softened the outrages of the Brescians and mitigated the rage and fury of the Senate in the eyes of the latter. Always conciliating, he never ceased in his numerous communications with the French general to endeavor to interest him for the Republic. He was, however, too enlightened not to perceive that it was impossible to pacify such violently conflicting passions in an amicable manner. 5. Difficulties attending the Venetian affairs. The French general long meditated on the state of affairs. It seemed to him impossible thus to leave in his rear 3 millions of persons abandoned to disorder and anarchy. He had no more influence over the friends of France than over the Senate itself. He might indeed prevent their taking particular steps, but he could not hinder them from talking, writing, and personally irritating the Senate in a multitude of details of administration to which he was a stranger. It was, however, necessary to decide on a line of conduct to disarm the people of Brescia and Bergamo, to declare itself entirely for the Senate, and prescribe all innovators would have been to alienate the popular party without securing the attachment of the Senate. And if this atrocious policy could have entered the mind of the French general, its result would infallibly have been, as under Louis XII, the eventual union of the whole population against him, to induce the Senate to form an alliance with France, modifying its constitution and conciliating the people of the terra firma. Would doubtless have been the best course, and the French general had accordingly done all in his power to induce them to adopt it. Whatever he gained, a victory, he renewed his proposal, but it was always unsuccessful. A third course was practicable: to march upon Venice, seize that capital, and there effect by force the necessary political alteration by modifying its laws and giving the predominance to the partisans of France. This was the true way of cutting the knot which could not be untied. But when, after resolving on this scheme, it became necessary to fix the time for carrying it into execution, he found it impossible to adapt it to circumstances and to his grand project on Vienna. He could not march upon Venice so long as Prince Charles should be on the Piave. It was therefore necessary to begin with defeating him and driving him out of Italy. But when this great success should be obtained, would it then be eligible to relinquish the fruits of victory? Would it be right to delay the passage of the mountains for the purpose of bringing the war to the neighborhood of Venice? This would be giving Prince Charles time to recover, to reconnoiter, obtain reinforcements, and create new difficulties. Venice could not be attacked without Prince Charles being previously defeated, since he covered that city, and it ought not to be attacked after his defeat, because time would then be too precious, and it would be proper to pursue him to Vienna. Venice was very strong. It was defended by its lakes and a great number of armed vessels, while 15,000 Sclavonians formed its garrison. Being mistress of the Adriatic, Venice might receive additional troops, and her walls enclosed the moral strength of all the sovereign families which were about to fight for their political existence. Who could estimate the value of the time which our troops might consume in this new enterprise, and if the struggle should be prolonged, what effect might not such a resistance produce on the rest of Italy? Nor did this new war want for opposition in Paris. Venice had a very active minister there. The councils were opposed to the Directory. The Directory itself was much divided. Napoleon knew that if he consulted the Directory respecting the enterprises on Venice, they would not answer or would avoid the question. If he should act of his own accord, as he had hitherto done, without asking for any authority, he was certain, should he fail of immediate success, to be reproached with a violation of all principles. As a general-in-chief, he had only a right to repel force by force. A new war against an independent power could not be commenced without orders from his government. It would have been incurring the guilt of usurping the rights of sovereignty. Thus, the decisive step of declaring war against Venice could not be taken first, because the general had no right to do so. Secondly, because it was incompatible with the plan of carrying the war into Germany without delay. The episode of Venice might become a principal affair which would cause the failure of the grand affair of Vienna. It was therefore necessary to determine on simple military precautions as far as regarded the Venetians. Brescia and Bergamo were sure, as well as the countries on the right bank of the Adige. The French troops occupied the citadels of those two cities. Verona, which was less favorably disposed towards us, was kept in awe, not only by its castles, which were well provisioned, but also by the old palace on the right bank, which, being put in a state of defense, became an actual citadel in the midst of the town, and rendered its possessors absolute masters of one of the 3 stone bridges. All the troops which had been employed in the expedition against the Pope were destined to form a reserve which should be stationed about Verona, ready to proceed to any point where they might be required.